Welcome to the third part of our Heritage Talk. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, exploring the archaeology of the American Civil War without leaving Britain. Part 3 discovers the importance of the blockade runners.
So the Confederacy therefore had to find an answer. They turned to building armored warships to win the war at sea and in the great rivers of the US. The Union simply built their own and fought them to a standstill. They built powerful commerce raiders to attack the merchant ships that the Union also relied upon. This was a nuisance, but the Union sent its own warships to hunt them down, and the impact that they were able to achieve was not decisive. So the Confederates turned instead to evasion, trying to defeat the Union blockade by building merchant ships that were capable of penetrating it without being sunk or captured, bringing war supplies in and cotton out to pay for them. They came to be known as blockade runners, like you can see in the picture. Now, initially, the blockade was fairly ineffective, but as the blockading Union Navy learnt its craft, it gradually tightened. Now, because the characteristics that a successful blockade runner then required meant that they were not good long-distance cargo carriers, and because carrying guns and cannon directly from Europe would have breached neutrality rules, these blockade runners were based on the ostensibly neutral offshore islands that surround North America, such as Bermuda, Cuba, and Nassau. Nassau's Bermuda's over here, and Cuba, Havana. Havana was a great blockade running port. So was the Lelia a blockade runner? And what does it tell us about the design of such ships? Well, yes, it was, and it tells us quite a lot. This is what we think may be a surviving contemporary rigging plan of the ship, which also shows what the rest of it would have looked like when it was complete. It was clearly designed for speed so that it could outdistance blockading Union naval ships, which were often quite slow, before they had time to bring their guns to bear and sink it. That shape says it all, long and thin, with a sharp bow designed to cut through the water at speed. There's the bow, there's the stern. The approaches to southern ports were also quite shallow, too shallow in many places for Union warships designed for better seakeeping, and therefore with deeper drafts to go. The shallow bottom of the Lelia would have allowed it to go where those ships could not. And the low freeboard, which you can see in this model of a blockade runner, also gave ships such as the Lelia stealth qualities, reducing the distance that its approach could be seen, and therefore reducing the time that the Union ships had to intercept it. Blockade runners were painted dully, and some were even able to route the smoke that would normally be put out through the funnels, through pipes, and into the water, reducing the telltale smoke on the horizon that would have warned of their approach. Now, the demands of blockade running meant that ships such as the Lelia were very much at the cutting edge of 19th century technology. A fast shape was no use without power. Sail, which still powered most merchant ships, was too close to get through a blockade. That engine you've seen in the previous slide was highly advanced in the 1860s. And the ship was also built partially of steel, making it lighter and stronger than a similar iron ship and giving it a more cargo carrying space than a wooden ship. This was a very new and expensive shipbuilding material, and the Lelia was a very, very early steel ship. Steel, of course, didn't guarantee safety, and the qualities required of a ship designed to break the blockade were not those, as I've said, of an ocean-going ship. Small vessels with low freeboards were always vulnerable to the fierce conditions usually experienced in the Atlantic, or indeed anywhere on the western coasts of Britain. The Lelia was not the only blockade runner to come to grief before it reached the Atlantic. Here's the wreck of the Iona too, rather lovely conditions in the beautiful waters off Lundy, the Bristol Channel. And what you can see are the ship's boilers. You can see that, like the Lelia, the superstructure of the deck above has not survived. And you can also see that these are, even though they're partially buried, these are cylindrical boilers. These were, I think, a little more advanced than those on board the Lelia. And here are the engines and the remains of the paddle wheel on the left. This is again on the Iona 2. And here's the collapsed remains of the other paddle wheel of the Iona. Like the Lelia, the Iona 2 sank in the first storm it encountered, fortunately this time without loss. The fact that the Iona was based on the design of a Clyde estuary excursion steamer could not have increased the confidence of those on board that they would make it. And the Iona's crew is recorded as having mutinied because of the leaking that the ship suffered whilst the ship was still sailing down the Irish Sea from Glasgow. And I understand that when discipline was fierce in those days and they were put before a magistrate, and I understand that when offered the chance to go back on board or go to prison, they chose to go to prison. And when the Iona 2 encountered the storm, it was simply shaken apart. And I would say, perhaps, never sail in a boat called the Iona, because it must be an unlucky name. The ship was built after the Iona 1, which was a riverboat converted for blockade running, so even more vulnerable. And that didn't even get out of the Clyde because it was run down and sunk by a larger ship, which was coming in the opposite direction. Now, early in the war, blockade running was left to private enterprise, but this often resulted in the importation of expensive luxuries rather than essential war supplies, and was rather disorganized. By the time that the Lelia was built, blockade running was instead firmly in the hands of the Confederate government, although they were careful to disguise their ownership of the vessel through the front of private individuals and businesses. Southern businessmen involved in blockade running inspired the leading character of Rhett Butler, played by the heartthrob actor Clark Gable in the famous, although now distinctly unfashionable and rather long Hollywood epic, Gone with the Wind. Now, the title of my talk was uttered by him in what has become an iconic moment in cinema history. However, by including this quote, my intention is not to focus on the rather misplaced glamour with which that film portrayed the Confederate cause, but as a rather darker reflection on the role played by the British and the people of my family's hometown, Liverpool, in it.
Thank you for watching part 3 of our heritage talk. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, exploring the archaeology of the American Civil War.